Good morning. I'm really glad to be standing in front of you guys today. It has been a really busy, full weekend here at Park Plaza. Here at this building and with just our church family all over the city, it's been a really busy, really good weekend. And what I'm most thankful for is not the busyness of a building, but I'm thankful for the hearts that have been engaged in this place, the hearts that have led things in this place. Friday night had such an incredible night celebrating Celebrate Recovery's 10th year at this church, which it's an amazing thing to begin with, but we had such a fun time. We laughed. We prayed, we got to celebrate people in recovery. I mean, it was an amazing thing. And man, I could talk for a long time about CR, and I don't want to go too far deep into this, but one thing that Friday night really highlighted for me is that there's a common misconception that there are such thing as CR people. There is no such thing as CR people. There may be some regulars that attend CR, but there's no such thing as CR people. We're all CR people. Whether we go to Celebrate Recovery on Friday nights here in the chapel or not, we are all, what we're doing here this morning is celebrating recovery. Right, so I continue to be thankful for the work that goes on in that ministry. We had a great night here Friday night. Saturday morning, woke up to, we thought was going to be a full day of rain for the Kibo run, and somebody stayed up all night either praying or blowing the winds away because the rain held off until later in the morning, so it wasn't a real bad rain, just a little cool, and it was great for the runners, so great time. And the last night had Evocal up here blessing us with the word in song. Great night. And Cornerstone went out and had an Amish dinner or something. I mean, just all kinds of things going on. But like I said, we can say busy all we want, and that's not what I'm impressed with. I'm impressed with the hearts that I see. They're leading and growing and fulfilling God's will in all kinds of different ways. You have to bear with me a little bit today. If you might notice my voice may not be 100%. But what happens to my voice when it gets tired is it gets just a little bit lower, and really for me, that's a blessing, because when you have a face that looks 12, it's occasionally good to be able to sound like an adult. So I'm grateful this morning to be able to have just enough voice, maybe to carry through for the rest of the day today. You guys, today, this very day, you are going to have literally thousands of opportunities to give your attention to something. The research shows that somewhere between 4,000 and 10,000 advertisements are seen by everybody every day. 4,000 to 10,000 advertisements per day. And so advertisements are one thing you could take your attention to. Those are things that want to grab your attention. But there's other things that aren't necessarily asking for your attention, but you have the choice whether to give it. You're gonna walk by. I mean, you're walking by hundreds of people in this room. You're gonna walk by more people when you leave. If you go to a restaurant, you're gonna be walking by people, and they're not necessarily asking for your attention. But if you want, you can give them your attention. So you will have thousands of choices today to give your attention to something or not. But we all recognize that there are times when something is put in front of us, a circumstance, a situation, a person is put in front of us that really requires a response from us. 99% of those thousands of opportunities you're going to have today do not require a response from you. You can give it if you want, but they don't require it. Some situations require a response from you. This video may be the quintessential example of a circumstance that requires a response from you. Go and throw that up. If you're walking on a path and you look up,
I'm walking back.
and there's a
on the
mother
trail
bear
back
and
to camp.
two babies.
I'm walking down the trail, and Mom.
That
and two
is, you can
cubs.
just turn the sound down.
So
I don't know if you can turn the sound down or not. It doesn't really matter.
So walk-
He's just walking backwards on the path. If you're walking on a path and there's a bear in your path, that's going to require a response from you. I would recommend you coming up with some sort of a game plan and making a choice about how you want to handle that. That's not something that you can just ignore, just walk by without considering it. There may be some consequences to that. So there are the extreme cases of the bear on the path that require a response immediately. You guys also have a more daily interactions with something that requires a response. Most of us, I would say, before having left the house this morning, may have taken a glance in a mirror. And for some people, that requires a response. Some people more than others. Some people, it's a little quick adjustment, straighten the shirt, do whatever you need to do. Some people, it's more a Hollywood team of professionals that need to respond. But we all understand there's looking in the mirror occasionally and maybe normally requires some sort of response. This has nothing to do with anything. I wondered this morning if you were forced to give up your phone or give up ever looking in a mirror, which one would you, that has nothing to do with anything, just a question that crossed my mind this morning. All these things require a response. And even groups are often presented with the scenario that requires a response, or that really elicits heavily a response in some sort of way. That's really the story of the Grace property. If you're new with us or if you're visiting, this church is in the middle of a major process of deciding whether to move our ministry and our efforts to a different facility in a different part of town. The reason we're in the middle of deciding whether to do that or not is because a situation came to us and it got our attention, and it was such the situation that required a response. It was just too good to say, we're just going to ignore that, let it float by, it's not a big deal, we're just going to move on with our lives. It was a big enough deal that it required a response from us. So today's passage, we're going to get to a group and we're going to get to an individual that came to something that required a response from them. And so we all understand what this means, to require a response from somebody. But I think first we need to look at some of these characters that we're going to be dealing with here and remind ourselves of really who this is that we're talking about, just to get a good idea of when this response comes, what this means exactly. What are we talking about? Who are we talking about here? The group. Now this group is a group that are very set in their ways and in their identity. I mean, they are the teachers of the law. They were known as the Sanhedrin. Several hundred years, they were God's people. They were the keepers of the law of Moses. They had survived lots of ups and downs as a nation, but now they were set up in Jerusalem in the newly refurbished temple that Herod redid. And this is not, when I always thought of, there's a temple that the Jews worshiped in. It's their modern day version of a church building. No. This was not, and probably don't even take it from me. Talk to anybody that went on the Jerusalem, on the Israel trip, and talk to them about the Temple Mount. And is that just a church building? No, this is a massive facility that this group of people found themselves a home in. Now, it was large enough to not just come to church together. They don't just come to worship God and then go back to their homes. This is a place where community happens. People come there daily to worship and to talk and to meet and all sorts of things. And this is a place that they held influence and they held authority in this space. Now, they were waiting on Messiah to come. But when Messiah came, he was only going to make their authority and their power stronger and greater. They were very set in their ways. They were backed by hundreds of years of history. And now they're living large in Herod's temple for the past 50 years. So they're in a good place. They're set. They're good. Next character is a guy by the name of Pilate. This is Greg Hicks, but he's playing Pilate in the movie The Son of God, if you've seen that. Now, Pilate was the procurator of Judea. Now, Pilate was not a Jew. Pilate, I mean, obviously by the way he's dressed, Pilate is Roman. Okay, so the Jewish culture, the Jews as we know them, and they, we talk about their life and their journey with God, and they lived around the temple, and that's where they had their worship. So they were their own little community. But this community sat in what was the larger umbrella of the Roman Empire. So the Roman Empire, what they allowed them to do was they allowed the Jewish people to kind of govern themselves, give them some measure of self-governance. But they placed somebody, the Roman Empire placed somebody over them just to make sure that they don't get out of hand. The Jews, it was not unusual for them to have some sort of uprising, for them to get worked up about different things. And so the Roman Empire needed to put somebody over them just to say, hey, you guys govern yourselves for the most part, but I'm here to make sure you stay in line. Okay? So this is Pilate. This is Pilate, the procurator, the guy that's just, he's a little bit of a glorified playground monitor. I mean, he's watching them just to make sure nothing gets out of hand and that they stay kind of in line with that they're not causing any massive disturbances in the community. And then we get to the character that's the bear in the path. We come to Jesus. Jesus is claimed to be the Son of God. Jesus performed miracles, and he healed people. He cast out demons. But the thing that made him the bear in the path for this group of the teachers of the law, the thing that made him, we can't ignore this anymore, is first of all, he had amazed the crowds. So Jesus had gathered a following for himself. This is obviously just a depiction, but this is, I think, a good depiction of maybe a common scene around Jesus. Jesus standing, teaching, people watching in amazement. Some were there just to see the miracles, but he had gathered a following. So he had gained some influence within that culture. And it's not just that he had authority and influence. It's not just that he was popular. But Jesus was teaching with the authority of the temple. Jesus was teaching about sin. Jesus was teaching about prayer. Jesus was teaching about a life with God. Those are things that belong to the teachers of the law. Those are subjects to be taught within the confines of the temple. And now Jesus was here, not just within the temple, but everywhere walking around, place to place, teaching about sin, about prayer, about life with God. And so now, the following is getting bigger, and he's taking some of their authority. So now the Sanhedrin has a bear in the path. They can no longer just ignore what's going on. The moment this turned is recorded in Mark 11. Mark 11, Jesus walks in to the temple area. Again, this is not just one building, large structure. Jesus walked in to the temple area. And what we know from the story is Jesus walked in, and what he saw, he flipped over money tables and drove out people who were selling animals. Well, so we need to put some context to that. People were coming from all over the place for Passover, traveling lots of miles to come to Passover. And when they came to Passover, they wanted to have something to bring as an offering. They wanted to bring a sacrifice. So bringing animal sacrifice was normal. But if you're walking 60 miles and you want to bring an offering, it may not be smart to bring your sheep along with you on a 60-mile journey. By the time you get there, that may not be worth offering as a worthy sacrifice to God. Something may happen to the sheep on the way there. So it actually makes sense, and it was common that within the confines of this temple area, not in the holy place, not right where, but in the confines of this larger structure, these animals were sold to people who came wanting to have something for themselves to offer as a sacrifice. So the fact that there were people selling animals within this whole big scheme, this whole big facility, that's not the problem. People also came in from areas that had different currency. They had different coins. And so they couldn't just go and they couldn't go exchange this foreign currency for this animal. And so there were money changers. There were currency changers. You guys recognize those if you've been to an airport. I mean, you can go to a foreign country and go to this kiosk or the teller, and they'll give you the exchange rate, and you exchange American money for euros, American money for whatever it is. So this was happening. There were money changers here at the temple. The fact that there were money changers here in the facility was not the problem. The problem, and a little bit we have to speculate, but I think it's pretty safe. That the problem was that not that they were just selling things and exchanging money, but they had started exploiting the people. They had started upcharging everything. And so now they weren't just helping people in their efforts to present an offering to God. They were taking advantage of the people who were coming from out of town. I mean, it's a gas station in the middle of the nowhere that's charging $4 for gas. If you're coming, you need it. And so you're going to pay whatever you're going to pay for it. And so they started using this exploitation money to start paying the temple tax. And they started using this money in whatever ways, but they were exploiting the people coming to worship God. And so when Jesus came in and started overturning tables, it wasn't that you're not supposed to be here at all. It's that what you are representing is not what this temple is meant to represent. And I know what this temple is meant to represent because I, Jesus, am the embodiment of what this temple is meant to represent. For those people, the means to an end had become the end itself. The means to an end being that the temple is meant to point people towards God. But they had started using the temple as the end itself, as we're just going to make sure that this temple is thriving, and we keep our authority, we keep our power, and nothing gets in the way of that. So Jesus comes in and says, that is not what this temple is about. This is meant to be a house of prayer, and you turned it into a den of robbers. So at that point, Jesus is setting himself against the natural flow and the natural course of the culture of these Jews. And so it was then that they started to say, this guy, these teachings, his following, we have got to get rid of this guy. We can no longer ignore what he is doing. So we get to our passage for today. Continuing on through the book of Mark, we look at the story in Mark 15. And I just want to read this. It'll be up on the screen. Just 15 verses. Just bear with me here. Follow along. Very early in the morning, the chief priests with the elders, the teachers of the law, and the whole Sanhedrin made their plans. So they bound Jesus, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate. Are you the king of the Jews? Pilate asked. You have said so, Jesus replied. The chief priests accuse him of many things. So again, Pilate asked, aren't you going to answer? See how many things they are accusing you of. But Jesus still made no reply, and Pilate was amazed. Now, it was custom at the festival to release a prisoner whom the people requested. A man called Barabbas was in prison with the insurrectionists. Again, back to these Jews, it was not uncommon for them to have some sort of uprising. He was in prison with the insurrectionists who had committed murder in the uprising. The crowd came up and asked Pilate to do for them what he usually did. Do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews? Asked Pilate. Because he knew it was out of self-interest that the chief priests had handed Jesus over to them. But the chief priests stirred up the crowds to have Pilate release Barnabas instead. Then what do you want me to do with Jesus? What shall I do then with the one you call the King of the Jews? Pilate asked him. Crucify him, they shouted. I think at this point, Pilate realized what had happened. And Pilate realized the trouble that he was in. Because part of this culture, the Jews were allowed to govern themselves, but one thing they couldn't do on their own, with their own governance, they could not give a death sentence to someone. They had to have permission from the Roman authorities to do that. So it says very early in the morning they went. The reason they went very early in the morning is because that night before they had made a choice. But in this culture and the way they govern themselves, you're not allowed to make binding choices at night. You have to wait till the next day in the light of day to make decisions that stick, that have authority. And so very early the next morning they go to Pilate to hand Jesus over to him. So I think at this point when he says, so what do you want me to do with the one you call the King of the Jews? Crucify him. And now Pilate knows what has happened. He's being trapped by the Jews, and they're starting to get riled up. And so his response is, but what has he done? Why? What crime has he committed? But they shouted all the louder, crucify him. Wanting to satisfy the crowd. Maybe the saddest sentence in the Bible. Wanting to satisfy the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas to them. He had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. So the question is, what do you do with Jesus? Well, what did they do? Why were the Sanhedrin, why were the teachers of the law, why were the Jews not able to see Jesus for who he really is? Why was Pilate not able to make a decision based off who he was maybe seeing Jesus to be? So what do you do with Jesus? You can go the Sanhedrin way. They were so wrapped up in their identity and perceived importance and power that they weren't willing to consider that Jesus could be right. Because if he was, their status in their community would have to change. More simply put, they were too self-absorbed to accept anything that would undermine their authority. Even more simply put, pride prevents change. And Jesus was coming, saying there needs to be a change. But the pride was too great with the Sanhedrin to be able to accept what Jesus was saying. Or you can maybe go the Pilate way, where Jesus' true identity really had no space to reside because Pilate's life was filled up with the expectations and demands of other people. Maybe more simply put, Pilate's priorities kept him from giving Jesus a real chance. Maybe even more simply put, bad values equals blurry vision. Pilate was not allowed to see Jesus, was not even given even the opportunity to recognize Jesus for who he really was, to truly see him in the clearness and the reality of who he is, because he was too focused on the other voices in the crowd. So my question is, can we relate? Are we holding on so tightly to comfort and status that we can't even be changed when we come face to face with Jesus? We won't ever know that Jesus offers the only comfort that surpasses understanding, that Jesus offers a status called redeemed, which is unparalleled to anything on earth, that those reservoirs of comfort and status are just a mirage. You're going to get there and try to take a big gulp, and you're going to swallow sand, and it will not satisfy. It's Jesus that satisfies. It's Jesus that fulfills. It's Jesus that takes you where you want to go because he has made the way. You're walking your own way. You're believing lies that have convinced you that you're fine, always hoping that life will start to feel right. But Jesus says that I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life. So when you come face to face with Jesus today, don't turn him down because it will be just too hard or I just don't know how. We're all being presented with Jesus today. So the question is, what are you going to do with Jesus today? And are there things in your life that you're holding on to so tightly? I don't know what it is. I don't know if you're holding on to a job you shouldn't have. I don't know if anybody here has a job they shouldn't have, but something that says, "Oh, I've got to do this because without it there won't be enough money to provide." Are you holding on to a habit that I just can't? That's just who I am. I just don't want to give that up. That's just part of who I am. Are you holding on to a secret? That, Kevin, if I gave that up, if I brought that would change it would ruin me. That would change everything. Today, don't ignore Jesus because it will be too hard. Trust in Jesus. Or are there maybe too many voices in your life at once that you're trying to please them all? What's the loudest voice that you hear when you truly consider giving your entire life to Christ? What's the loudest voice that comes up? Is it a culture that says you won't fit in? Is it a banker that says you won't have enough? Or again, is it the voices of the habits and the voices of the secret that say, don't you dare, we can't handle this if things change? I don't even know who I'm talking to in here this morning. I don't know how this hits you exactly. But my guess is, well, no, not my guess. I'm 100% sure that there's at least one person in this room who has dealt with these things, who has listened to other voices, and who's tried to hold on tightly to some perceived status and ignored what Jesus had in front of him. I'm 100% sure there's one person in this room because you're looking at him. So I know there's other people in this room, and I don't know who I'm talking to. But I just want to ask you, trust Jesus. Trust in Jesus. Sometimes it takes a while. Trust in Jesus. He has what you need. He is living in the people around you. So if you think, I don't know where Jesus is going to be in this, if I decide to really go all in, Kevin, it's going to blow up, it's going to be bad, it's going to change everything. I don't know if I'm ready for it. I don't know if I can do this. Trust in Jesus. And that's my prayer for you all. But not everyone will choose that path. But Jesus was born on earth to a virgin. He was raised growing in favor with God and men. He was crucified on the cross. He was buried for 3 days, and he walked out of a tomb and made himself known to his disciples and to 500 other people. He ascended into heaven to sit at the right hand of the throne of God. And so Jesus is no longer someone that we can just ignore anymore. Jesus is now something that no one on this earth can now just ignore anymore. So the question is this morning, what will you do with Jesus? He stands here just like you're looking in the mirror. There's a book titled Evidence That Demands a Verdict. And author, preacher, minister Andy Stanley has a foreword in the beginning of this book. And this quote comes from that foreword. He says, I know exactly how long you stand in front of the mirror each morning. You stand there until it gets better. A lot better. Most of us would rather be late than to show up on time not looking our best. After all, nobody gets credit for looking in the mirror. We're judged by how we respond to what we see. I think sometimes we have given ourselves credit for coming to church. That has become something a mark of, yeah, that's a Christian duty. I'm a Christian. I've done that. I'm going to church. You don't get credit for looking in the mirror. You don't get credit for showing up and sitting down. We're only judged on how we respond to what we see. What can we do for you today? How can we help you to respond to Jesus in a way that you need? How can we support you in a difficult decision to throw off everything? Last week, Mitch had a bucket up here that we came and dropped things in that we need to get rid of, that we need to let go of. And those are great. The responses were so heartfelt and so pure, but some of them were difficult. So how can we help you? Please know that there are people in this room. If I ask everyone in here, do you support someone that comes and sits up here? Let's just do that. Raise your hand if you would support someone to come sit up here in front and respond to the invitation. Okay, now who's going to come down here and respond to the invitation? I'm not forcing you. We're not going to sing Just As I Am 30 times until you come down. That's not what this is about. But please know that there's support. That you're not alone. And then as hard as it might be, trust in Jesus. Because he is the way, he is the truth, and he is the life. If there's anything we can do for you, if there's a way we can pray for you or support you in any other way, please come forward as we stand and as we sing.